Alrighty, you guys are going to find this quite humorous, but my plan for the word today was to quickly but somewhat thoroughly cover Genesis chapters 29, 30, and 31. Insert laughter here. Now, I knew today was Staff Sunday, and I knew what I felt I should be accomplishing in the Word today. But between the two different things that I knew, somehow I did not incorporate time management into that. So the long and the short of it is we will not be covering Genesis 29, 30, and 31 today. We will cover what we can. I do have a couple other, not announcements, but announcements, whatever. It's been an interesting couple of weeks. And on our Wednesday night study, we've been going through the book of Jude. And how long are we doing that? A year? Yeah, a year-ish. And I'd been talking with the Lord and praying and figuring out what are we going to do next. And it was pretty silent. So it came to me last week as we were wrapping up the book of Jude that rather than have the next book, the next series of teaching on my mind, on my heart, and in my head, what I needed to have on my mind and my heart and my head was prayer. And so I asked our Wednesday night group to be thinking about, I've since come up with, I think the Lord's given me where we want to go on that. But this coming Wednesday night, I think the comment was, join us for prayer and let's blow the roof off this place. So, as a congregation, I would encourage you, join us Wednesday night here at 7 p.m. We're going to pray. And we're going to pray for whatever it is the Lord puts on our heart. So it would be exciting if you could join us, bring your requests, bring yourself, come and join us. We want to pray. Amen? My next exciting announcement is Pastor Eric from the Passion Center will be here next Sunday. Now the board didn't even know about this. We just wrapped this up. Eric and I believe it was yesterday, day before perhaps. So he's going to come next Sunday and he'll be bringing the message and bringing an update on the mission in Malawi. For those of you who might not have been here with us a long time, we've been partnering with Malawi for 18 years? I don't know, long time. And God has used people all over the world to join together for that mighty mission that's taken place in Malawi. And so I'm so excited that Pastor Eric Saitoff is going to be here next week to bring a message and share that with you and hopefully keep those of us who've stayed involved over the years kind of rekindle the fire and maybe generate some interest for first-timers who haven't seen the work. And then on the 14th, on a Friday, every Friday morning, we have chapel here for the school, 9 a.m. On the 14th, Pastor Saul is going to be in here sharing the Malawi update with the kids. Adults can come. I'd encourage you to come on the 14th and join, not only to hear from Pastor Saul and hear about what's going on there, but to watch these kids that we talk about so much, how they react to it and how their hearts are for these little orphans in Malawi and God's work there. So it would be fun. So next Sunday, Pastor Eric here. The following Friday, the 14th, Eric will be here in chapel at 9 a.m. Wednesday prayer meeting. I think I've covered that. Open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 29, please. Genesis chapter 29. We're going to start in verse 1. And as we have covered over the last few weeks, 29 verse 1 says, So Jacob went on his journey, came to the land of his people of the east. Okay, so the history of Jacob and Esau, we know there was contention. We know that Jacob swindled his brother Esau out of the birthright. and his brother Esau threw it away like a piece of trash. So Jacob swindled his brother. His brother hated his birthright. Isaac intended to bless the oldest, Esau, even though he knew that God wanted him to bless Jacob. So this whole mess of turmoil and deceit and spinning yarns. And by the way, something interesting, when Jacob was going to bless his oldest son Esau, he told Esau, and he told him to get ready, harmonics. He told Esau to go hunt game, prepare it, and bring it in so that I may bless my son. Although he wasn't doing that in secret, he was doing it on the sly. Because typically the blessing was passed on in the presence of the entire family. I don't think I don't think Isaac wanted Jacob to know what was going on. And I'm relatively sure he probably didn't want Rachel to know either, but she went and told Jacob. So anyway, this whole deal going on, and then we talked a couple weeks ago about the plan. Her plan is, okay, son, you need to go off to the land of your people. We're going to convince your dad it's his idea, so he'll send you away, which is what happened. He said, go get a wife. The plan was you're going to leave for a few days until Esau's hatred is diminished, and then I'll send for you and you come back. Well, man's plans don't always fit God's timetable, do they? Because it wasn't a few days, it was many, many, many years later. So Genesis 29:1, so Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and he saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks were gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. So there's many different advantages to doing this. If it's a very arid country, they would cover up the wells for evaporation purposes so that the water wouldn't get spoiled, so an enemy wouldn't come and spoil the water. So this is a preservation issue. And Jacob said to them, my brethren, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. And then he said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. So he just said to them, is it well? And they said, he is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Then he said, look, it's still high day. It's not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go feed them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together, and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we will water the sheep. Now while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban his mother's brother. Now there's a lot of connotations can be applied to this, but what I want to focus on today is that as the shepherds are all gathered together, and they said, we can't do this until all the flocks, and then they, multiple, will go remove the stone. Jacob wasn't having that. So when he saw Rachel, and he saw her sheep, and that they needed watered, he went and moved the stone. Now it doesn't say he enlisted help. He might have. He might have had people with him. I don't know. But the issue was, it needed taken care of, and he took care of it. He went and moved the stone. Oh, mercy, I lost my place. 29, verse 11. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Now, as we recall, Isaac had told Jacob, don't take a daughter from here, from the land of Canaan. Go back to Haran and take a wife from your father's house, from your kindred Nahor. And right away, the minute Jacob meets Rachel, well, maybe not the minute, he has to roll the stone away and they water the sheep. But Jacob kissed her. And by the way, this might not be a formal wedding proposal, but it's pretty clear that's what's implied here. And this happened pretty quick. Now, my wife and I joke with each other over the many years we've been together because I knew her, I think, 4 days and said, hey, I love you, and we'll be married. And she said, okay. and that's the way it went. And she had business to tend to. I had a business, so we were separated for a couple of months. I saw her a couple months later for a week. Next time I saw her, we got married. So, I mean, God moved fast. Amen. And God knows what he's doing. A long courtship probably would not have been good for us. God knew what he was doing. But as much as I joke about how quickly we moved, God moved even quicker with Jacob and Rachel. It was immediate. Then it came to pass, when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely you are bone of my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now, what's interesting here is Jacob stayed with him for a month. Now, it doesn't tell us that he was working for him for a month, but clearly he was. Even though Jacob had left his father's house and they had great possessions, he didn't come to Laban's house for a vacation. He was working while he was there. And Laban clearly understood that. Because you're my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. Quite interesting, this. He loved her so much that he would serve her dad for 7 years for her to be his bride. Say what you want. Jacob loved Rachel with all of his heart. Amen. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Jacob is about to learn a very important lesson about the importance of the birthright. Tradition is about to smack Jacob right between the eyes. It came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter, brought her to Jacob. He went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. And so it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. Surprise! Now, today this would probably be beyond understanding. But remember, in those days, women's faces were covered. There were veils. There was a ceremony. It was at night. So Laban pulled a fast one on Jacob. And Jacob did not realize until the morning when the sun came up, oops, he'd been tricked. Now, we've joked many times the last few weeks about how much of a trickster and a swindler Jacob was. In fact, that's his name, heel catcher. Heel catcher, always tripping up someone. But God had a plan for Jacob's life. And in the previous chapter, God had told Jacob that he had a plan for his life. Isaac's blessing, Isaac's promises, Isaac's covenant that he had received from God and Abraham, God passed on directly to Jacob. God himself passed this covenant on to Jacob. And regardless of how many times Jacob over the years tried to swindle people, tried to trick people, acted like the rest of us, God still loved him. God still had a plan for his life. and God's plan was going to come to pass. And quite often, Jacob was his worst enemy. God had a plan, but Jacob usually was 3 steps ahead of God, getting in the way. Amen? Yeah. So, Jacob runs into the ultimate trickster. He was a swindler, and he runs into Laban, who's the king of the swindlers. They have an arrangement. I'll serve you 7 years for Rachel because I just love her so much. Now, don't think along those 7 years, he didn't talk about how much he loved Rachel and how he couldn't wait to be married to Rachel. Don't think this was any secret. Laban knew for 7 years how much Jacob loved Rachel and how much he was looking forward to being her husband and how much work he was willing to put in to get her. This was no surprise. And I wonder if Laban didn't know from the very outset what he was going to do. I suspect he probably did. Con men usually have a plan. This is almost like the ultimate long game. Okay, so it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it's Leah. And he said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me?" Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, "I need a do-over. This ain't right. I contracted for Rachel. You sent me Leah. Never mind last night. That doesn't matter. Deal's off. I want Rachel." No, what's done is done. They were married. The marriage had been consummated. In God's eyes, they're married. He's not asking for a do-over. He's kind of upset about the way things have transpired, but there's no do-over for him. So he says, "Why have you deceived me?" And Laban said, "It must not be done so in our country to give you the younger before the firstborn." If I were Jacob, my question would be, didn't you know that 7 years ago? Isn't that something you could have mentioned 7 years and maybe a day or two ago? You got to wait till now? But done is done. Laban said, "It must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years." Now, a little idiosyncrasy with this week. He's not talking about 7 days. Fulfill her week. This is a shabuim, a week of years. In other words, okay, you got tricked. It's our tradition that we marry the oldest first. You're married. If you want Rachel, fulfill her week, another 7-year service. Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife also. Now, unlike with Leah, Laban gave him Rachel first, and he served his remaining 7 years while he had Rachel, his wife, also. So it's pretty messed up. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. Then Jacob also went in to Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban still another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, "The Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." How do you think things felt for Leah? She knew her husband didn't love her. She knew that. But here's a hint. She never gave up. All the way to the end, as she's bearing children and naming them, her desire is that her husband would love her. She never gave up. I lost my place. Verse 33, thank you. Then she conceived again and bore a son and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also." And she called his name Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son and said, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and then she stopped bearing. Going forward into chapter 30. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. We don't understand the significance of childbearing issue with couples in this age. This was the most important thing to a woman, was that she be able to bear children to her husband, children that would carry on the family name, carry on the family traditions, carry on the family business. They might be farmers, they might be businessmen, and if they didn't have children, they might just go under. You know, all of us come to an age when we can't work anymore. Our bodies wear out. Our energy levels wear out. At some point, somebody needs to step up and pick up the pace, pick up our lightweight, you know. Now in America, we have retirement accounts and we have all these things that we, Social Security, that we count on to pick up the pieces when we get older. But the reality is, for the vast majority of human history, it is our children that have come up and taken over the business, taken over the farming, stepped up and helped take care of the elders. Because we're all headed for that age, unless we die young or the Lord comes sooner, we're all coming to that point where we can't do what we used to do. Amen? So it was incredibly important, and women felt like they were cursed if they couldn't bear children. So Rachel is envying her sister, which this is strife in the family between sisters. And she said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Now, although Jacob is angry and he's snapping at his wife, he's right on in this premise. Because it is the Lord who opens the womb or closes the womb. It is the Lord who allows children to be born or not. It's the Lord who determines, can a woman get pregnant? Can she not? It's hard for us sometimes, especially those among us who have had difficulty having children. We have friends and family who couldn't have children, and therefore they didn't. We have friends and family who we think had a lot more children than they should have. Their quiver is kind of overfull. But the issue is, it's God who creates a new life. It is God who knits every child together in their mother's womb. It is God who creates that soul and puts in that body that he's forming with his own fingers, with his own hands. God creates that life in a mother's womb. Which is no surprise why the Bible-believing Christian should take great, great exception to anyone taking the life of an unborn, of a child in the womb. As we always say, if anyone has been involved in that, there's certainly forgiveness. But for the child of the King, there should be no more going forward. We understand. Jacob understood. Well, I'm going to imply a couple of things here. My implication would be Jacob could have said to Rachel, I've got a gang of kids with this one. I'm not the problem. Now, since he continued living, I'm assuming he didn't actually say that. He might have implied that, but his survival instincts were better. But he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? And he's right on. So she said, here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. Now, we have a lot of interesting historical writing in that in this day and age, this was a common practice. And although this sounds like cute imagery, it's not. When she said that she may bear a child on my knees, the surrogate would literally sit on the knees of the wife and bear the child. And symbolically, the child then became the wife's child. The surrogate whom she was bore through was blessed, but the child belonged to the wife. So that's what she's suggesting. Then she gave him Bilhah her maid, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged my case, and he also heard my voice and gave me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with great wrestling I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, so remember, Leah has already borne him 4 sons. She stopped bearing. Rachel has not borne him any children, so she gave him her maid. Her maid now bears 2 sons. Leah, who has stopped bearing, is watching all this going on thinking, that looks like a pretty good program. Works for them. So she takes her maid and she gives her handmaid to Jacob. Let's see, where am I? Verse 9. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as wife. Now, that's also a very important point right there. When they took the handmaiden, the surrogate, they became a wife. They were a subwife, but they were still a wife. So when a woman made the decision, such as Sarah did, such as both Rachel and Leah are doing here, when they make that decision, they did so understanding that this isn't a woman off the street we're going to pick up as a baby factory. She's going to become my husband's wife. Not in the same favored position that I am, but she's still going to be a wife. This is someone who is going to be involved in our family forever. So they didn't do it lightly, if they were wise. Okay, so Leah sees this program's going on pretty good, so she takes her Zilpah, her maid, gave him to Jacob as wife. And then verse 10, and Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, a troop comes. So she called his name Gad. And by the way, you know that's what she's implying there, right? We have a whole gang of kids, me and Jacob and my maid. So we're going to call this guy troop, or gang, or mob, whatever your vernacular today would be. Because his name actually means a troop cometh. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, I'm happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher. Here's one of the strangest. This one, I've always scratched my head about this. Now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. Okay, hold on right there. Who's Reuben? He's the firstborn son, right? Reuben is Leah's son. Mandrakes were well known to be aphrodisiacs. Why is Leah's son in the field looking for aphrodisiacs for his mother? My first thought would be, ew. Take care of that yourself, Mom. Don't want to know, don't want to see, don't want to hear. That's between you and Dad. I'm not involved. I'm out. But for whatever reason, Reuben wasn't out. He was in. So he was in the field. He found these mandrakes, and he brings them to Leah. And don't think for a minute, he doesn't know what they're for. Again, you. All right, moving on. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it a small matter that you've taken away my husband? Would you also take my son's mandrakes? And Rachel said, therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. So apparently they had a calendar arrangement for Jacob's time. I'll leave it at that. And so they have made a deal. I'm going to trade. We're rearranging our schedule. in payment for these mandrakes. When Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." And he said, "Cool." You don't see him arguing here, right? No. And he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. And Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. And Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons." So she called his name Zebulun. You see, she never did give up. She's still hoping that her husband will love her and become attached to her and dwell with her. She knows she has to share her time with Rachel, but she has known ever since they got married that she was second fiddle. That had to hurt. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Don't think that this implies that there are no other daughters born. The sons are listed because that's typically what you find in your scripture. Dinah is listed here because she's going to play a very, very important part a few chapters down the road. But there could have been daughters interspersed along the way. So don't think this means there's only one daughter. Verse 22, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son and said, "God has taken away my reproach." After all these years, this is Rachel's first child that she bore herself. So she called his name Joseph and said, "The Lord shall add to me another son." And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you." Okay. Real quick, the tribes of Israel and their birth order. First of all, by Leah was born Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And their names, which is not an exact science, but judging by some historical context and the input of the mothers themselves who named them, Reuben could mean "looked on my affliction." Simeon could be heard or hearing. Levi, the husband, is joined. And Judah means praise. So Leah has 4 sons. Then she watches Rachel give her maidservant, who has 2 sons, Dan, which means judgment, and Naphtali, which means wrestling and prevailing in wrestling. So Leah sees the success of the handmaid ploy, so she gives Jacob her handmaid, who also has 2 sons, Issachar and Zebulun. Issachar means my hire or my service. Zebulun, the dwelling place. And last but not least, Rachel had Joseph. That was her first son. Now we know that she subsequently had another son named Benjamin, and she died during childbirth. Benjamin originally meant son of agony. It was later changed by Jacob to the son of my right hand. So the 12 tribes of Israel, all these tribes that are listed here, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. This is where the 12 tribes came from. Except not quite. Not quite. You know, Genesis is the book of beginnings, right? In Genesis, we find the beginnings of all doctrine, and quite often the answers to questions that plague us throughout the Bible and things that we just can't understand. So there are 12 tribes of Israel until Jacob adopts Joseph's 2 sons years later in Egypt. Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph adopts them as his own son. Jacob adopts them as his own sons, which technically gives 13 tribes to the Israelites. What's all this mean? Well, the 12 tribes are mentioned in Scripture 20 times. Never in the same order. You got to get the birth order here from this chapter, but quite often they're listed out of order, and they're not always followed by name. One primary example is in Revelation chapter 7, where God gives us out of 12,000 out of all these tribes were sealed. In that list of tribes, we're not going to go through it today, but if you go back and read that in Revelation, what you discover is that Dan is not mentioned. Dan's not in there at all. Quite often, when one or two tribes are missing in the lineage, Ephraim and Manasseh will take their place, because you got 13 tribes to choose from. If you want to leave one out, you can substitute. You following me? I'm probably not explaining this very well. You got a baker's dozen from which you choose 12. How's that? Okay. In Revelation 7, Dan is not mentioned at all. And Ephraim is included, but not by name. Manasseh is included, and Joseph is included. Since Manasseh is spelled out by name, Dan isn't in there. Joseph is included by name. God is including the tribe of Ephraim, but he won't use their name. Now, I'm not going to go through what that means today, but do some research. It's very interesting that these 12 tribes, how often they're mentioned in Scripture, and there's times you look at them and you go, wait a minute, somebody's missing. Why is that? Well, there's always a reason. So with that, we're going to close today. And you can laugh at me about thinking we would get all the way through chapter 31, but that's okay. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this time that we've had, Lord, to celebrate the staff, to recognize the importance of having them in our hearts and our prayers and our support. And we pray, Lord, that what we've seen in your word today would be real to us. Lord, we pray that as we go through this week, you put people in our paths that we can share your goodness, your glory, and your Son with. And so, Father, in all these things, we hope and our heart's desires that you've been blessed and that you have blessed us, having been in your presence and sat at your feet. And we thank you for all these things. In Jesus' name, amen.